Things you learn from Christian history, number 7. Heresy is any theological speculation which is not the official theological speculation. Variant, a heretic is someone who is wrong at the time. Virtually every major Christian thinker has been declared a heretic by somebody at some point. And some of Jesus' teaching looks a bit unorthodox, if you ask me. Chapter 7. Beguines, Bibles, and Black Death. Christ's substitute. Following Barbarossa's unfortunate drowning and subsequent pickling, his son Henry took over the Holy Roman Empire, TM, but Henry died while both of his sons were still infants. The result was a struggle for supremacy between two contenders for the throne, not the infants. They were more interested in who was going to get the biggest rusk, but Otto of Brunswick and Philip of Swabia. Both asked the Pope, Innocent III, Pope from 1198 to 1216, to adjudicate. Innocent replied that it was not the Pope's role to choose the Emperor. This seemed quite surprisingly hands-off. But then Innocent cleared his throat and clarified it was not his role to choose the Emperor, but it was the Pope's role to correct the choice if he felt that the German princes had elected the wrong one. Innocent came from an aristocratic background, and it showed. Popes had for a long time styled themselves vicars of Peter, from the Latin word vicarius, meaning substitute. But at his consecration, Innocent announced that he was the vicar of Jesus Christ, the successor of St. Peter, the Christ, i.e. anointed of the Church of the Lord, the God of Pharaoh, midpoint between God and man, who can judge all things and is judged by no one, set between God and man, lower than God but higher than man. He then shouted, "Who's the daddy?" and tore the Vatican telephone directory in half. Possibly not. Never mind, Peter. Now hear this. The Pope is Christ's substitute. Argue with that if you dare. The Last Crusade. Sadly, Innocent's credentials as Christ's substitute don't stand up to a huge amount of scrutiny. Not unless you see Christ as someone who really enjoyed starting wars. Because in 1204, Innocent decided that what Europe really needed was another crusade. Yes, other crusades had failed, but they weren't launched by the Vicar of Christ. It did not go well. Here's the surprise. The Crusaders decided to attack Egypt first, on the grounds that it was the most vulnerable of the Muslim states. But that meant ordering a lot of ships from Venice, which would have been okay, but when the army assembled in Venice, they were dismayed to find that only 1,500 Crusaders had bothered to turn up, which meant that they had ordered way more ships than they needed. The Venetians insisted, though, that someone had to pay for all those extra ships. So they proposed a deal. The Crusaders could pay for the surplus ships by attacking Hungary first. There was the tiny issue of Hungary being a Christian country, but business is business, and someone had to pay for all those boats. When the Pope heard of the plan, he was appalled, and he excommunicated the Crusaders. But then the now unauthorized Crusaders had a visit from Alexius, the would-be heir to the imperial throne at Constantinople. He had been usurped by another candidate, and he promised that if the Crusaders stopped by Constantinople first and put him on the throne, he would pay for the expedition to Egypt. So that's what they did. They went to Constantinople and reinstalled Alexius in 1203. But Alexius's promises proved as empty as his treasury. There was no money to pay his new emperor installation fee. So he melted down church silver and gold and inflicted punitive taxes on the populace. Then some drunken French crusaders came across a mosque in the city, which had been built for the use of visiting Muslims. Naturally, being A, crusaders, and B, drunk, they set fire to it, and in the process burned a quarter of the city as well. The people had enough. They kicked the awful Alexius out. The Crusaders went berserk. In one of the most shameful acts in the history of these shameful wars, they attacked Constantinople in a 3-day bender of violence and rape. Nuns were raped in their convents. Justinian's magnificent cathedral of Hagia Sophia was ransacked. And, oh, the thigh-slapping hilarity, they sat a prostitute on the throne of the patriarch to dance and sing crude songs. The Fourth Crusade was about greed and nothing else. It dropped entirely the pretense that the other crusades had clung to of being somehow holy wars. This was an attack, not against the Muslim infidel, but against Eastern Christians. In the Crusaders' eyes, these people spoke Greek and had funny names, so that made it all right. A Frankish crusader became emperor of the East, and the Venetians, who had already stolen St. Mark himself from Alexandria, filled St. Mark's Basilica with the booty stolen from the greatest Christian city in history. I don't know why I'm on today. You might think this jaw-droppingly awful episode is where the concept of the Crusade hit rock bottom. But oh no, there were still some big holes to dig.